It's past midnight inside a nearly empty studio. The lights hum softly, one of them flickering like it's about to give up. Cigarette smoke hangs low in the air, mixing with the warm smell of dust and overheated equipment. A reel-to-reel tape spins slowly, hissing even when no one is speaking. Somewhere in the background, a chair scrapes the floor, followed by a long silence that feels heavier than sound itself. On the tape, you don't hear a hit song. You hear frustration, laughter that cuts off too quickly, a voice muttering something that was never meant to be replayed. This wasn't music being created. It was the Beatles quietly coming apart, one recording at a time. And that raises an uncomfortable question. Were these tapes hidden to protect their legacy or to hide the truth? Every major band keeps archives, boxes of reels, test recordings, false starts. But buried deep in the storage logs from the late 1960s is one reel that stands out, not because of what's written on it, but because of what isn't. No song title, no date, no producer notes, just a strip of tape, logged, boxed, and quietly forgotten. When fragments of it were finally reviewed years later, engineers noticed something strange almost immediately. The tape doesn't begin like a normal session. There's no count-in, no tuning. It starts mid-room as if someone hit record by accident. You hear footsteps. Someone clears their throat. Another voice laughs, then abruptly stops, like they realized the mic was live. Then the mood shifts. What follows isn't chaos, but it isn't music either. Half-formed melodies drift in and out. A piano plays the same phrase over and over, slightly faster each time. A guitar string snaps, and no one reacts. One voice mutters something indistinct, followed by a long pause that feels intentional, not accidental. This is where rumors took off. Some listeners claim the tape captures a private argument that was never meant to exist outside the room. Others insist it's just exhaustion bleeding into sound, late hours, endless takes, tempers worn thin. A grounded explanation backs that up. By this point, sessions regularly ran past midnight, and recording machines were often left rolling to save time. Accidental recordings weren't rare. What was rare was how uncomfortable this one feels. Here's where the numbers start to tell a story. Between 1966 and 1969, the band logged over 1,500 hours of studio recordings. More than 70 complete songs were attempted and abandoned. Entire reels, sometimes 30 to 45 minutes long, were erased or shelved without explanation. This tape was one of the few that survived untouched. And then there's the detail that keeps historians arguing. Near the end of the reel, a voice enters the room late. No greeting, no acknowledgement, just a single line spoken quietly, almost to themselves. Studio logs suggest that person wasn't scheduled to be there that night at all. Was it someone stopping by unexpectedly? Or was this proof that the walls of the studio had stopped meaning anything? Either way, whoever archived that tape made a decision. Not to destroy it, but to make sure no one ever asked about it. And that choice says more than the recording itself, because once you hear it, you can't unhear what comes next. By 1968, the studio no longer felt like a shared space. It felt like a maze. Doors closed, curtains drawn, each member drifting into their own corner, recording parts separately, sometimes without even knowing who would hear them later. The sessions for what became known as the White Album weren't just long, they were fractured. Instead of a band playing together, the tapes reveal something colder. One voice records a take, leaves the room, and another replaces it hours later. Engineers quietly swap reels while tension hangs in the air. On several recordings, you can hear sighs before the music starts, like someone bracing themselves. On others, there's dead silence where conversation should be, followed by a sudden burst of sound that feels almost aggressive. Fans often talk about how experimental this era was. Fewer people talk about how isolating it sounded. There are moments where a song clearly restarts because someone else walked out. You hear chairs move, a door shuts. No explanation. Then the music resumes, tighter, sharper, like it's being played at someone rather than with them. Rumors later claimed these tapes captured secret fights. The grounded explanation is less dramatic, but no less unsettling. The band had stopped functioning as a unit, and the recording process simply reflected that reality. This is where scale matters. During the White Album sessions, the band spent over 700 hours inside the studio. More than 30 different songs went through multiple radically different versions. On some tracks, a single instrument was recorded 50 to 100 times before a usable take was chosen. One song alone took 102 separate recordings across multiple days. Engineers worked in rotating shifts because no one knew when the night would end. That kind of pressure changes people. Some listeners swear they hear anger in the rhythm, drums hitting harder than necessary, guitars pushing into distortion even when they don't need to. Others claim it's just artistic ambition running wild. Both explanations can exist at once. Creative freedom doesn't cancel out emotional strain. Sometimes it amplifies it. What makes these tapes so uncomfortable isn't that they sound unfinished. It's that they sound personal, like private thoughts slipping through the cracks of professional recording. And while the final album presented a polished front, the raw recordings underneath tell a different story. One of a band learning how to work apart, not together. And that separation didn't stay in the studio, because the moment cameras entered the room the following year, the fractures became impossible to hide. When the cameras started rolling in early 1969, the idea was simple. Strip everything back. No studio tricks, no endless overdubs. Just the band, playing live, proving they were still a unit. That was the plan. What the tapes captured instead was something far more uncomfortable. From the first rehearsals, the sound is different. Not raw in a creative way, raw in an exposed way. You hear missed cues, half-finished jokes that land flat, conversations that drift into silence instead of laughter. On several recordings, instruments keep playing while voices stop completely, like no one wants to say the next thing out loud. The filmed footage later showed tension, but the audio recordings go deeper. Without visuals, there's nowhere to hide. Passive comments slip through. A suggestion is made, then ignored. Another is repeated with more force. No one raises their voice, which somehow makes it worse. The pauses between sentences stretch longer each day. Some fans later claimed these sessions felt cursed, pointing to the uneasy atmosphere and sudden emotional shifts on tape. The grounded explanation is less mystical, but just as heavy. The band was under pressure to create an entire project in a matter of weeks, while being filmed, recorded, and scrutinized in real time. Fatigue plus surveillance is a dangerous mix. People stop performing for each other and start retreating inward. The numbers tell their own story. The Get Back project logged over 60 hours of filmed rehearsals and nearly 100 hours of audio recordings in less than a month. Songs were started, abandoned, and restarted sometimes 5 or 6 times in a single day. Entire mornings passed without a usable take. At one point, a full week of rehearsals produced almost nothing deemed releasable, and the tapes remember everything. You can hear frustration disguised as professionalism, a laugh that arrives a second too late, someone quietly practicing alone while others talk over them. These aren't explosive moments, but they add up, slowly, relentlessly. What makes these recordings unsettling isn't conflict, it's resignation. The sense that everyone knows something is wrong, but no one knows how to fix it without making it worse. By the end of some sessions, the room sounds emptier than when it started, even though no one has left. But one person was clearly carrying more of that weight than the others. And on the next set of tapes, you can hear it catching up to him. By the time these recordings were made, John Lennon didn't sound like someone chasing perfection. He sounded like someone trying to stay present. On several unreleased tapes, his voice drifts in and out of focus, not technically, but emotionally. Lyrics trail off mid-line. Melodies start strong, then collapse into muttering. Sometimes he talks to no one in particular, as if the microphone is the only thing still listening. What makes these moments unsettling is how unfiltered they are. This isn't performance. This is fatigue leaking through. On one reel, he repeats the same phrase again and again, changing the words slightly each time, like he's testing different versions of the same thought. Then he laughs, short, sharp, and goes quiet. The tape keeps rolling. Rumors took this and ran with it. Some fans insist these recordings capture paranoia or something darker creeping in. A few even claim there's something off in his tone, as if he sensed the band's end before anyone else admitted it. The grounded explanation is simpler, but no less heavy. By 1969, Lennon was juggling constant recording, personal upheaval, public scrutiny, and chemical assistance that blurred day and night. Extended sessions plus little rest can fracture anyone's focus, especially when creativity is expected on demand. Scale makes this impossible to ignore. In less than 2 years, Lennon recorded vocals on over 60 tracks, many in late-night sessions that stretched 10 to 14 hours at a time. Studio logs show stretches where he recorded on 6 or 7 consecutive days without a full break. On some get-back reels, his voice appears on tape for less than half the session, even when he was physically present the entire time. He was there, but not always there. There's also the way others respond to him on these tapes. Suggestions are shorter, conversations end quicker. Not out of cruelty, but caution. It's the sound of people walking on emotional glass. One wrong sentence, and the energy shifts instantly. Some listeners claim they hear desperation hiding behind the humor. Others hear artistic restlessness refusing to settle. Both interpretations are valid. Creativity and instability often sit closer together than anyone wants to admit. The tapes don't diagnose anything, they just record it honestly. And honesty can be uncomfortable. Because as Lennon's focus drifted, someone else in the room began tightening their grip, not out of control, but out of fear of losing everything. And that tension only grew louder on the next set of recordings. While the tapes capture others drifting, Paul McCartney sounds like someone doing the opposite, pulling everything inward, trying to keep it from collapsing. On the surface, his voice is steady, focused. But listen closely, and you hear the strain underneath. Suggestions come faster. Instructions become more specific. Silence bothers him more than mistakes. On several unreleased recordings, McCartney can be heard guiding arrangements in real time, humming parts that haven't been written yet, nudging others toward a structure that barely exists. It doesn't sound bossy at first. It sounds urgent, like someone racing a clock only they can see. When no one responds immediately, he fills the space himself, on piano, bass, even drums, layering parts that used to be shared. This is where the narrative split. Some fans later painted him as controlling, pointing to these tapes as evidence. Others hear something closer to survival mode. The grounded explanation leans toward the latter. With the band's internal rhythm breaking down, someone had to make decisions, or nothing would get finished. Leadership, especially under pressure, rarely sounds gentle when captured raw. The numbers support that tension. During the Get Back period alone, McCartney appears on nearly 90% of the recorded rehearsals. He often arrived first and left last, logging 10-plus hours a day in the studio for weeks. On some days, he attempted dozens of takes of the same song, adjusting tempo or structure by seconds at a time. One rehearsal looped a single arrangement for over 40 minutes without a break. That kind of intensity changes how you sound on tape. There are moments where his encouragement lands. You hear energy lift, laughter return, a song finally click. And then there are moments where the room stiffens. A suggestion hangs unanswered. Someone keeps playing, but not engaging. McCartney doesn't snap, but his voice tightens like he's carrying the weight of 4 people by himself. A few listeners claim there's something unsettling about these recordings, as if the studio itself feels claustrophobic when he takes over. The grounded explanation, again, is human, not mystical. Stress compresses personalities. When one person pushes forward, others often pull back. And that's exactly what happened, because while McCartney was trying to steer the ship, one member quietly stopped steering at all. His voice faded, his presence thinned, and on the tapes that followed, that absence became impossible to ignore. If you listen carefully to the later tapes, George Harrison doesn't disappear all at once. He fades. Early on, he's present, offering ideas, suggesting changes, quietly testing riffs. But as sessions stretch on, his voice becomes rarer. When he does speak, it's shorter, polite, almost distant. The microphone still catches his guitar, but the energy behind it feels restrained, like he's already halfway out the door. On several unreleased reels, you can hear long stretches where Harrison plays without saying a word. Songs loop. Others talk over him. His parts remain steady, but they don't push forward. It's not defiance. It's withdrawal. And the tape records it without commentary, which somehow makes it hit harder. Later, rumors claimed these recordings captured resentment boiling under the surface. Some even suggested spiritual disillusionment, that Harrison sensed something wrong in the room. The grounded explanation is again painfully human. By this point, Harrison was writing more than ever, but fighting for space to be heard. Creative frustration doesn't always explode. Sometimes it shuts down quietly. Scale makes his withdrawal clearer. During the Get Back sessions, Harrison contributed ideas to dozens of rehearsals, but fewer than a third of his song suggestions were seriously explored. On tape, his speaking time drops dramatically after the first 2 weeks. In one stretch, he goes nearly 3 full days of rehearsals with barely a sentence captured on audio. Yet he's still there, still playing, still listening. And then there's the moment everyone tiptoes around. One recording captures a casual conversation drifting past music entirely. Someone jokes, someone else laughs. Harrison's guitar stops. The tape keeps rolling. A chair moves. Footsteps fade. No announcement. No argument caught on tape. Just absence. Listeners later realized this aligns almost perfectly with the day he temporarily walked away from the band. Some fans describe this as the eeriest tape of all, not because of what's said, but because of what isn't. No shouting, no dramatic exit, just the sound of someone choosing silence over struggle. A few paranormal claims surfaced years later, suggesting the room felt heavy during this period. The grounded explanation is simpler. When one member disengages emotionally, the entire dynamic shifts. The studio doesn't need ghosts to feel empty, and that emptiness lingered. Because once Harrison stepped back, the remaining tapes reveal something chilling, not tension, but a strange, unnatural quiet that even music couldn't fill. As these recordings circulated privately among engineers and insiders, a strange narrative began to form around the space itself. Abbey Road wasn't just a studio anymore. It was described as heavy, draining, even unsettling to be in after hours. Some who listened to the tapes late at night claimed the room felt different once the music stopped, like the silence had weight. The rumors grew quickly. A few listeners swore they heard sounds on certain reels that didn't match any instrument. A faint knocking, a low hum that didn't belong to the equipment. One story claimed a voice appeared briefly between takes, too soft to identify, then vanished when the tape was cleaned up. To some, it felt like the studio was recording more than sound, like it was absorbing emotion. But there's a grounded explanation that fits just as well. Abbey Road was filled with analog equipment that produced constant background noise. Tape hiss, electrical hum, air circulation systems cycling on and off. Long sessions dulled perception. Fatigue makes the brain search for patterns, especially in repetitive sound. When people are emotionally drained, silence itself can feel threatening. The presence many described may have been nothing more than stress echoing back at them. Still, the numbers are unsettling. The studio operated nearly 20 hours a day during peak periods. Some sessions ran past 3 a.m. with only 4 or 5 hours of rest before the next day began. Engineers logged hundreds of consecutive hours in the same rooms, listening to near-identical loops. Under those conditions, auditory illusions aren't rare, they're expected. Yet, not everything is so easily dismissed. There are tapes where the mood shifts abruptly, without a clear cause. Laughter stops mid-sentence. Playing becomes mechanical. A few seconds of silence stretch longer than necessary, as if no one wants to break it. Paranormal explanations say the room itself reacted. The grounded view says something else was happening. Unspoken tension reached a point where even sound felt dangerous. Both interpretations survive because the tapes don't resolve them. The recordings never explain the unease. They simply capture it. No conclusions, no commentary, just atmosphere, frozen in magnetic tape. That ambiguity is what keeps the rumors alive. Not proof, but possibility. And when you step back, the most disturbing realization isn't about ghosts or energy at all. It's that, by this point, the studio felt less like a place of creation and more like a witness. And witnesses, unlike people, never forget. By the time the final tapes were boxed away, the decision to keep them unheard wasn't dramatic. It was practical. These recordings didn't sound like legends. They sounded like people under pressure. And that was the problem. The public image of the Beatles had always balanced on something delicate: effortless creativity, unity, control. The unreleased tapes shattered that illusion. They revealed second-guessing, fatigue, friction, moments where nothing worked and no one knew why. Releasing them wouldn't have added to the myth. It would have complicated it. Insiders later hinted that some reels were flagged not for quality, but for tone. Arguments left unedited, awkward silences that felt too intimate, studio chatter that crossed from creative process into personal strain. Nothing scandalous in isolation, but together, they told a story the band wasn't ready to tell. The scale of what stayed hidden is staggering. Of the 1,500-plus hours recorded between 1966 and 1969, only a fraction ever reached the public. Dozens of full reels, some 30 to 60 minutes long, were archived without release. Several tapes were duplicated, then resealed, suggesting internal debate over whether they should exist at all. At least 4 major recording projects went through multiple internal cuts before being approved for release. This wasn't censorship, it was curation. There's also the legal and emotional layer. These tapes didn't belong to one person. Releasing raw audio meant exposing everyone equally and unequally. One voice might sound confident, another vulnerable. Once public, those impressions couldn't be taken back. Silence in that context was protection. Some fans argue the tapes were hidden to control history. Others believe they were hidden out of kindness, to preserve dignity in moments that were never meant to be shared. Both ideas can coexist. Legacy isn't just about what you show, it's about what you choose not to. What makes this unsettling is that time hasn't softened the recordings. Engineers who've heard them say they still feel intrusive, even decades later, like reading someone's diary without permission. And that raises a final uncomfortable thought. If these tapes were released today, would they deepen our respect for the band or strip away the last layer of myth that made them untouchable? Because the answer says more about us than it does about them. When you listen to these recordings as a whole, a pattern emerges. Not chaos, not failure, something quieter and far more unsettling. The sound of 4 people outgrowing the version of themselves the world refused to let go of. These tapes don't capture a collapse in a single moment. They document erosion, slowly, relentlessly, reel by reel. The music is still there, brilliant in flashes, but it's surrounded by hesitation, silence, and exhaustion. That contrast is what makes the recording so difficult to hear. Genius doesn't vanish. It strains. It bends. Sometimes it breaks under its own weight, and when it does, the tape keeps rolling. The uncomfortable truth is that none of this is rare. What's rare is hearing it unfiltered. Most bands get to hide these moments. Most legends are edited after the fact. But these recordings survived untouched, preserving the cost behind the creation. They remind us that innovation isn't clean and unity isn't permanent. There's no final verdict hidden in the reels, no single moment where everything falls apart, just a gradual realization that the machine they built together had grown bigger than any one of them. The studio stopped being a playground and became a pressure chamber. Some hear these tapes and feel closer to the band than ever. Others feel like they've crossed a line, listening to something that was never meant to be shared. Both reactions are valid, because this isn't just music, it's proximity. And proximity changes how we remember people. Maybe that's why the recordings stayed hidden for so long, not because they were dangerous, but because they were honest. And honesty, when stripped of context, can feel like betrayal. So when you ask whether these tapes are lost masterpieces or painful artifacts, you're really asking something else entirely. Should we preserve legends by protecting their image, or understand them better by hearing the truth, even when it's uncomfortable?